Welcome to 3 Count Commentaries. I am MongoSlade, and Triple H just had a Vince McMahon moment where he criticized the Performance Center talent, and I'm here for it. This is what I want to hear. I want to hear that Triple H is challenging these people to get better and not just taking them at their BS. He was on the High Performance podcast, and he asked him some questions about things that are high performance to him or things that are important to him or something to that effect. One of these things is passion. And he's talking about this, and he's talking about the looming threat of complacency. And let's get into this.
People all the time that want more, but aren't doing anything different to get more. They're just doing the same amount of work, if not less. And almost to the point of they're not getting what they want, so I'll show you. I won't try so hard. Well, that's certainly going to get you where you want to go, right? Like, I'll shut down. I'll go out there and I'll not put in the effort, or I'll not work as hard. And to stay focused to that drive. I can't tell you how many talent I see come through our developmental system in phenomenal shape. Work ethic, they look great, their stamina, they never blow up in the ring. They're just, everything is spot on. They do everything right. They get brought up to Raw, SmackDown, and they start on a journey. And 6 months in, I'm like, this guy's, you barely can tell he's the same guy he was 6 months ago. Like, they get out of shape. They stop training so hard. Some of that's a learning curve of like doing it on the road versus doing it in the Performance Center, all those things. But like,
let's pause it right here real quick, because there's a couple of things that are pretty good statements here. One, he talked about guys who, when they don't get what they want, they shut down. This was the critique that JR had for Carlito back in, 2008, I believe it was, where Carlito basically just gave up and decided having decent matches was enough. I think that he had been Intercontinental Champion a couple of times. He just said, forget it, And Jim Ross kind of sniffed it out. And this led to Vince, of course, taking notice. And this epic segment where Ric Flair completely destroys Carlito backstage verbally. It's a very famous segment, I think. And Triple H is saying that he sees this stuff all the time. And guess what? So do a lot of us. A lot of us have seen where performers reach a certain level of success and think, hey, this is great. And then they don't get to the next level as quickly as they think they should. And all of a sudden, it's almost like they're encased in amber. And it's hard to note how many of those people have come and gone in WWE. I think when you look at certain people who are not immediately used, maybe the last 5 or 6 years especially, guys like Keith Lee, guys like Odyssey Jones, where they disappeared. Guys like Joe Gacy, guys like Dexter Lumis, people like Indy Hartwell, where you think that they've peaked already and there was nowhere for them to go, and you weren't seeing that they were trying to grow or trying to do anything else. And look, there's a lot of these people on the roster. There's still a lot of people on the roster that this applies to. And we don't, again, we talking at this point, but we don't know everything. Like, for instance, I said Keith Lee, but Keith Lee has had, health issues. He had a health issue in WWE that kind of affected his ability to work out. But it didn't improve when he went to AEW. It only got worse. So I feel comfortable putting Keith Lee on the list because even 2-3 years later, he didn't get any better. When you look, his wife, for God's sake, Mia Yim, she has not gotten any better. She has not, I haven't seen anything in her where I'm saying she's even trying. And she's been wrestling for a long, long time. And I don't see a lot of effort in her. I don't see any attempt to change her character, change her presentation, or anything. And I hate to say this about a guy like Apollo Crews, who I like. He's been in WWE a long time. Outside of his most recent run in NXT, he hasn't really done much. And we don't know if he's trying and he's getting stuffed, and he's pitching ideas and they're shooting him down, or he's just doing what Daniel Bryan, criticized guys for doing way back in the Gap. They just, hopefully I don't get called for this main event match. And by main event, I don't mean main event of Raw. I mean like main event, the TV show. Like they don't want to do any work. Like they show up to get the show money, and whether they work or not, they don't really care. Like this has been an issue for a long time in wrestling, and it was created with the guaranteed money. The guaranteed money created these guys who do not care about staying in shape. These guys who do not care about working on TV. Guys who do not care about the company. Guys who disappear long periods of time. And I know we're talking about WWE and we're talking about NXT or whatever, but you see it a lot in AEW as well. But the Performance Center is an interesting thing because so many people go through it. And when you're a talent, especially, I guess you could say one of these recruits, let's say a recruit, which would be different from an indie wrestler, they think getting on TV is making it to a degree. And so there's probably are a lot of those guys who, when they get on TV, especially if they get on TV consistently enough, they basically just say, hey, this is as good as it's going to get. Or I don't care if it doesn't get any better than this. I made it to the point where most other people have never made it. And so why put in the effort? So I want to let him continue his thought though, because there's something else that I want to discuss as well.
Becoming complacent. And when I feel like when I say like passion or drive, complacency is the opposite of that, right? Like, so when you're complacent, it's because your passion is waning. Sometimes you have to remind yourself of what your passion is to do this. It's funny. I see sometimes talent that they're sort of at this level. I don't want to say phoning it in, but at this level, and it's not progressing, and they're not killing themselves. I've gotten a modicum of success, and I'm good with that, and I feel good about where I am, and they're sort of, that passion has waned, and then they get injured, and boy, that shit goes through the roof, because all of a sudden, the threat of, well, I got it, like, what do you mean? Maybe I can't do this anymore, or like, and all of a sudden now they're back locked in, right? And their work ethic is back, and all those things, because that threat of losing something, it's easy to get complacent, lose that passion, lose that drive, lose that fire, become complacent, become in a place where you're just going through the motions of what you became good at, and you're just doing it every day. And it's easy to phone it in, and it's easy to keep doing all this stuff, and you've figured out a path of least resistance where I can be this successful and do it at this level, and that's good. But
okay, so I think this is this smells of like Dolph Ziggler to me. This smells of like Nick Namath. Well, he got to a certain point where he was like, "Hey, everybody likes me. Everybody likes what I'm doing. I think I'm gonna stick right here. I think I'm gonna plant my flag right here. I don't really need to get better than this. I don't really need to try too much harder. I'm coasting, bro." And he was able to. And look, I like Dolph Ziggler as much as the next guy. I'm not saying it like it's a terrible thing, but it's clear that he was not putting forth 100% effort all the time. He realized he could have good matches with his eyes closed, and decided to have good matches with his eyes closed. And if he was on TV, and if he wasn't, especially in the last few years, it was most certainly one of those things where he didn't really care if he was on TV or not. He didn't really care what he was doing on TV. In fact, he would go on Twitter and basically say he's not watching the show. And at first I thought it was a bit, like he was, joking. But it became pretty clear later on that he doesn't even remember some of the things that he did. Somebody had a clip of him winning the NXT title. And he was like, wow, I don't even remember winning matches. It's like, now, again, he could be joking. But it's something where you like, hey, now that he's been outside of WWE, and I think that's the best barometer, is who turned it up when they left WWE? Guys like Christian did, when he went to TNA and he went to AEW, reinvented himself, turned it up a little bit. And then there's people who, they coasted. More of the same, Claudio, Cesaro, got Pac, guys like that who haven't changed a bit and been outside of WWE 5 or 6 years. And of course, the fans continue to blame WWE for these guys not making it. But when you look at it, it's like, where's the impetus for them to change? Who is going to put pressure on them for them to get better? And this is one of the reasons why I don't like Kevin Owens. Because I feel like Kevin Owens has been complacent for a really long time and not putting forth full effort. You compare Kevin Owens today to Kevin Owens when he first came in. The Kevin Owens who, when they let him beat John Cena, he had something to prove then. The last couple of years, man, Kevin Owens has just been chilling mostly. And maybe it's because he got comfortable. But I know that the sexy thing is for Mongo, you should be talking about the NXT talent. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of those people. There's so many of them, though. Like, there's a hell of a lot of people who came out of NXT, most of whom got released or washed out in some way, who, kind of peaked and called it a day. Like, they stopped putting forth the effort, they stopped trying. And then there's other people who are going to say, well, it's not that I stopped putting forth the effort, it's not that I stopped trying, it's that they weren't listening to my creative ideas. This is those are two Indian guys, Indu Share. That's probably their story, right? Like, these guys were terrible. And they stayed terrible the entire time they were under contract. AOP never really improved the entire time they were under contract. There's so much you can do with guys who are not giving you much to work with, who are sort of generic big dudes or generic speedsters, generic small guys. There's not much you can do. And it's hard to pick out, who I think the issue is. I don't think any of those people are currently under contract, And I saw some people say, well, clearly we're talking about Carmelo Hayes here. That's why Carmelo Hayes is not getting an opportunity. I'm not looking at Carmelo Hayes like a guy who's peaked in NXT. I look at him as a guy who he's missing something, Like, there's a difference between being a top guy in NXT where most of the people on the roster are rookies. Most of the people on the roster, they don't have the experience that he has. When you go to the next level, now you're competing with real estate with guys like Roman Reigns. You're competing with real estate with guys like LA Knight, who's been around for a really, really long time. Guys like Cody. Guys who have not only been around for a long time, but are over. Right? How do you break through and get to that next level? I think that's what's missing. I wouldn't say like, oh, Carmelo Hayes, he's lazy. That's not what he's saying. And I don't think he's talking about him. But there are people for whom, when you say, I'm not seeing the improvement, I think some of those people have been weeded out already, or they will be weeded out. You know, I'm looking at certain people and asking the question, of course, like, why are they still around? You know, like the Candice LeRae is like, what are you still doing here? I'm not seeing extra effort from Candice LeRae, but that's the nature of the beast. Hopefully he needs to be a little bit more strict when it comes to this stuff, because giving the fans a product with people who don't try, who aren't seemingly trying to try, or even worse, if Vince put somebody outside of their comfort zone, you putting them back in it. Like the Pete Dunne situation, right? He took away the Pete Dunne name, gave him something completely different. He was actually trying in that role, and it was okay. People started to like it a little bit, the whole Butch thing. And then he put him right back in the Pete Dunne role, and nothing. What's that other one? That other little one that hangs out with Pete Dunne, the beardy one, Tyler Bate. The guy's been, he's been next up for 5 years. He got signed when he was under the age of 20, if I remember. I think he was like 19 or something when they signed him. And he's still under the age of 30. But I still don't see anything special about him. I don't see that he's put forth any, like, he hasn't gotten out of shape, but he has not added anything to his game that made him stand out. There's a lot of people like that on the roster. Still today, they could probably go through with a hacksaw and get rid of most of these people that have pretty much peaked. And I give Triple H a lot of grief for assigning a lot of the older talent, And part of that is, again, the guaranteed contracts. But a lot of it is also when somebody finally feels like they're not moving and they give up, like we were talking about earlier. You were doing okay, and then Triple H decided to sign Phoenix or Penta or whatever. Now you're one slot down again. You were building that back up, and then you had to take another step back. It takes a lot of mental strength and a lot of what he's talking about in terms of passion and drive to overcome stuff like that, because people do become defeated in situations like that. People do get frustrated. And oftentimes those people want to leave when they are put in those situations. They typically don't want to stick around. But when you ask the question about NXT talents that have perhaps became complacent, I think Gable Steveson is another one, that probably the biggest one that comes to mind. He had one match on television, and that was pretty much it. And if you Cameron Grimes, and I'm not a big fan of the way Cameron Grimes has handled the situation with Gable Steveson, but with him complaining about him online and stuff, I think that's very unprofessional. But it makes sense. Like, they invested all kind of money and time into this guy. He just stopped trying. He stopped caring. Ronda Rousey is another one. You put a lot of time and money into Ronda Rousey, and she does nothing but complain. She does nothing but whine. Like, that grates on people. She looking for any reason and any excuse to why she couldn't be, as good as everyone wanted her to be. Oh, it was because they didn't give me enough time. Now, granted, he didn't say he saw people come through NXT. He said people coming through the Performance Center. And sometimes it is people who blow up and they get out of shape. But sometimes people just stop giving a fuck. Sometimes they just stop caring. And there's been some people who I think have gotten out of shape since their time in NXT. But most of them are so low on the totem pole that it don't matter. Like, Zoe Stark or, Shayna Baszler, those kinds of people. Like, do they really matter? No. So who cares? But when he started making these comments, I started thinking about basically people who underachieved. I started thinking about Ronda Rousey, Gable Steveson, Odyssey Jones, Keith Lee, people who washed out almost immediately. Who, even they got a big push on the main roster. And they simply just didn't want it. They didn't have it. I think he makes a good point. The question is, what is he going to do about it? Are he going to start releasing people? Because that probably is the best way to handle this. Or to change the pay structure and not guarantee contracts anymore. But they're not going to do that. You're not going to be the idiot that's going to sign a non-guaranteed contract. That would be dumb, right? So I think Triple H is learning what Vince already knew, and that is quite a few of your favorites. They went surfing for 5 years and didn't put forth the effort. You thought it was the booking. That's what you blamed. But in reality, your guy was cooked and has been cooked for 3 or 4 years now. But you're still gassed up off some shit from the Tokyo Dome. Yes, I'm talking about Shinsuke Nakamura, who I like. I was hoping Nakamura would be something major. But it's pretty clear that Nakamura from like 2019 forward has just kind of been, I'll have good matches with my eyes closed, going to go surfing. And that's what it is. It is what it is. And nobody steps in and say, look, he's basically stealing money at this point. Nobody stepped up and said anything, so they just kind of let it go. And people have been taught that somebody who wants to do stuff and is not given a chance, like an Andrade kind of person, is what's the word I'm looking for? Is somebody you can't make happy one way or the other. But I look at Andrade as a guy who, yes, creative, he probably is quite picky with that, but he also is a guy who wants it, and if he's not feeling like, he might be one of those Carlito kind of guys where if I'm just going to sit here and have good matches in the middle of the show, then fine, but don't expect me to do extra. Don't expect me to do more than I need to. And there's quite a few people who are like that. That's a natural human thing. So I 100% understand what Triple H is talking about, where he's coming from, and it makes sense. Because I, as a fan, can see it in certain people that when they don't care, when they've punched out. At the highest level, I've talked about Roman Reigns being punched out for like a year and a half now. It's not just that he has an easy schedule. It's that you could tell Roman just did not care after the Bloodline thing. Did not go the way that he wanted it to go. With him wrestling The Rock, he's just kind of been floating ever since. He hasn't been the same since. He just stopped caring. It's like when CM Punk stopped caring right before he walked out. You could tell. You can look at these guys and tell. And it sucks that, guys at the highest level, of course, they get burned out because they're injured and all that kind of stuff. But people who are on the bottom rung, for them to still be in that sort of position, it's crazy. That's just crazy. But let me know what you guys think, and I'll talk to you guys later.
No one does it better.